Can you believe daylight savings time is coming again? I can't even believe it. It just seems like we went through that, didn't it? So, but just like I said on Super Bowl Sunday, we have 6 services, okay? So 6 here, 2 next door, 2 in Calamasa. So whenever you wake up, come to church. That's it, man. We just love to have you. You know, we're in a really crucial chapter today. We're looking at Mark chapter 8. Everything changes in Mark chapter 8. Because up until this time, people have been following Jesus for many different reasons. Some people were following Jesus because he was kind of the entertainer. So I brought my set of Twilight Zone DVDs to illustrate that point. Yeah. Do you guys even know what the Twilight Zone is? You do? Really? Really? Wow. Okay. So, you know, some people saw Jesus like that. Like he was doing the healings, he's breaking the bread, he's multiplying the fish, man. And it was just so cool to be there because Jesus was the best show in town. So some people were following Jesus because of his entertainment value. Now, other people, they were following Jesus because he was their first aid kit. Man, they showed up when they needed bandaged up. They showed up when they needed something done for them. And then when they didn't, man, they were out. They were gone. People do that today. Honestly, some people follow Jesus for the entertainment. Some people follow Jesus when they have a need. And then when they don't have a need, they're gone. And then they come back when they do have a need. So some people saw Jesus like that. Now, here's the interesting thing. Is Jesus entertaining? Well, there's no one as fascinating and as wonderful as Jesus. Then is Jesus there to help us with our needs? Yes, Jesus is there to help us with our needs. But if you reduce Jesus to that, you've got some problems. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Other people, they followed Jesus because he was going to make life more comfortable. I know you guys have been looking at this pillow thinking, why didn't I think to bring one of those to church today, huh? Yeah. So some people saw Jesus, man, and they just thought, you know, he's going to make my life more comfortable. He's going to make my life easier. But in this chapter, Jesus is going to say something, and many of those people who followed Jesus just because he was entertaining, or followed Jesus just when he could do something for them, or followed Jesus because life was going to be comfortable, they are going to turn and they are going to depart. In fact, this chapter changes everything because this chapter starts up in a place called Caesarea Philippi. Let me show it to you on a map. See it? It's right there at the top. It's way above the Sea of Galilee. It's a beautiful place, mountains, streams, trees, absolutely beautiful. Jesus is going to do some stuff up there today. A lot of people are going to stop following him, and he is going to head south to Capernaum. See it there at the Sea of Galilee? Then he's going to head south to Jerusalem. He is beginning a trek to Jerusalem to be crucified. And that's why Jesus in this chapter says this. He says, if you want to follow me, you need to take up your cross and you need to follow me. Now, what does that mean? We're going to talk about that today. Huge ramifications for us today in this series called All In. So if you pick up your bulletin, let's follow along. Let's look at the text. We're going to begin in the middle of the chapter. Mark 8, verse 27. It says, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Do you guys see that there? Now, Caesarea Philippi was not only beautiful, it was a place where idols had been worshipped for a long, long time. In fact, if you go all the way back in the Old Testament, they used to sacrifice their children to a god named Baal there. You used to have orgies with Baal and Ashtoreth there. Now, by the time of Jesus, there's a huge temple. In fact, you can Google, and they've got images of it that they've recreated. Huge temple dedicated to Caesar. Every year, the people around Caesarea Philippi had to go to that temple, light a piece of incense, and say, Caesar is Lord. Then there was another god that was worshipped there. It was called the Pan god, or the god was named Pan, P-A-N. Here's a picture of him. He was half goat and half man. Here's a picture of where his temple, what it looks like today. They had little statues of Pan in these alcoves, and they would actually throw animal sacrifices in that hole. So there's all these gods that are worshipped there, so it's an appropriate place for Jesus to ask this question. Because on the way to Caesarea Philippi, do you see verse 27b? It says, on the way he said to them, who do people say I am? Now, folks, that's an important question for us today. People have all different kinds of views of Jesus. To people in Islam, he was a prophet. To Hindus, he's one of many gods. To Mormons, he's a god, but all of us can become gods. You see, there's all these different views of Jesus that exist today. Who do you think Jesus is? And he's pushing that question out to the disciple. He's saying, who do you think that I am? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. So most people thought he was just a prophet. So he's going to push it a little further. He says, but what about you, he asked, who do you say I am? And look at this. Peter answered, you are the Christ, that means the Messiah. And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Now here's what you got to know. This is the first time one of the disciples have without hesitation declared clearly Jesus was God, the Messiah, the Savior, the one that has come to change the world. It is a crystal clear theological statement, and Peter is on the nose with this statement. So Jesus goes on in verse 31, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Now, folks, every one of these disciples had seen it. During the lifetime of Jesus, his 33 years here on earth, 30,000 people had been crucified in Rome. They were used to walking through the countryside and seeing crosses on the hillside. They knew the pain of that kind of death, that a 5 to 7 inch spike would be sent through your wrists and through your feet. Your nerve endings would react and your whole body would feel like you were burning up from that. They would take the cross and prop it up and drop it in a hole. And when it landed in that hole, every joint would be torn out of place. That you would die a long, slow, suffering death of suffocation. You'd have to push yourself up on nail-pierced feet in order to get a breath. And finally, when you were absolutely exhausted and you can't push anymore, you would suffocate to death. It was awful. It was excruciating. And now Peter has just said, you are God, Jesus. And Jesus says, I'm going to die. Look what Peter does. It says he spoke plainly about this, Jesus did, about the cross. And then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Peter just thinks, this is ridiculous. The word rebuke there, it's a super interesting word because it's the same word that's used of Jesus rebuking demons. Peter isn't, come on, Jesus, come over here. Let me just give you a little good advice. Don't talk about dying like that. It gets people nervous. No, it's not like that. Peter's like, what? Don't say that. Stop that. We don't know exactly his words, but we know it was a stern, strong rebuke, the kind of rebuke that Jesus would have given to a demon. And it says that after Peter rebukes him, because Peter just thinks it's ridiculous, why would the God who hung the universe in place, why would that God come to earth and allow himself to be crucified? So he says, don't speak like this anymore. And then Jesus, verse 33, turned around and looked at his disciples. He rebuked Peter now. Get behind me, Satan, he said, you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. Now you got to understand what's behind this. All along the road, you know what Satan had been trying to do? Satan had been trying to stop Jesus from going to the cross. You even go back to the temptation of Jesus. Satan looked at Jesus and said, look, if you bow down and worship me, I'll make you my VP, man, and I'll give you the kingdoms of the world. Satan longed for Jesus to not go to the cross. I like the way John Piper rewords it. He says, Peter, if you resist my plan to die, you resist God. You side with Satan against God. Satan doesn't want me dead because he wants you in hell. Do you guys realize what would have happened here if Jesus had decided not to go to the cross? Every one of us would have been destined for hell today. We would have no hope for life in heaven after death. And so Jesus takes Peter and he gives him a stern rebuke in front of everybody. And then look what he says, Mark 8:34. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, get your pens ready, I'm going to get you to circle something. He said to the crowd, if anyone would come after me, he must circle, deny himself, and circle this, and take up his cross, and circle this, and follow me. He must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. Now, folks, this is the key verse in this sermon on Mark, and this series on Mark. and we put it on a magnet so you can take it home and memorize it. You want to know what it means to follow Jesus? This verse is going to tell you what it means to follow Jesus. These will be available at the doorway when you leave today, so you can take it home and you can memorize that. It is so easy to follow people today. You go on Facebook, click, you're following them. They say something you don't like, click, you've unfollowed them. It's so easy to follow people today. You go to Instagram, click, you can follow them. You can unfollow them. But Jesus says, no, if you want to follow me, first of all, you got to deny yourself. You've got to put down your self-will, your ego, the idea that it's all about you. Folks, this is totally countercultural in our world. We live in a world that says, demand your rights, get what you deserve, put yourself first because no one else will. And Jesus comes and he says, no, you want to follow me. You deny yourself, and then you pick up your cross. And every disciple there knew exactly what that meant. It was like an electric chair. It was a method of execution. It meant death. Jesus says, deny yourself, die to yourself, and follow me. Now, what does that mean? What exactly does that mean? Fortunately, Jesus goes on and he tells us. He explains to the disciples exactly what it means. And the first thing it means is this. You can turn the page. It means a daily surrender of my life to Christ. A daily surrender of my life to Christ. Now, what I want to do is jump to the Gospel of Luke here real quick because he expands it a little bit. It says, then Jesus said to them all, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross, what's the word? Daily, and follow me. You know, a lot of times we want to follow Jesus in some great one-time heroic act. And I'm not putting these things down. These are good things. But I'm going to go on a great missions trip, and that means I've followed Jesus. Or I'm going to, do one great gift, and that's going to mean I denied myself and followed Jesus. No, I'll tell you what it means to follow Jesus. It is an everyday act. Every morning when you wake up, say, I'm going to surrender my ego. I'm going to surrender my will. I'm going to surrender my pride, and I am going to submit to Jesus Christ today in whatever he calls me to do. So a daily surrender of my life to Christ. Number 2, it means living for the line and not for the dot. It means living for the line and not for the dot. You know, I always use this little illustration of a pen. And when you look at the end of a pen, it's got a little ball on it there. That's like your life on earth. Your life on earth is so short. The Bible says it's like a vapor, like the grass of the morning. It's gone before you know it. And I'm just going to tell you, the older you get, the faster it goes. Amen? The older you get, the faster it goes. And someday when I'm older, I'll realize that. And it just is gone before you know it. Most people, here's the thing, they live for their little short life here on earth. All their priorities, all their values, everything they want and long for is for that. Now I always say, live for the line, not for the dot. Someday, as a Christian, you're going to die. You're going to leave this little dot of life behind, and you're going to live for all eternity. And eternity, think about it, compared to life on earth, if that's life on earth, eternity is like going to that wall, man. It's that long. Years and on and on. It's like going beyond that to the other building, building B. And going beyond that to what? What's next? Riverside, okay? And beyond that, San Diego and Mexico. You can do the geography. I'm just saying, eternity will never end. Folks, you want to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. You know what you're doing? You're saying, I'm living for eternity, not for this dot on earth. Now, let me show it to you because Jesus is the one that says this. In Mark 8:35, he goes on. He says, whoever wants to save his life, it's the word psyche, we get psychological from that, will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. For what good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet forfeit his own soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? Jesus is saying, you have a choice. You can put all your values, all your priorities, all your emphasis on this little dot of time that you live on earth. And you're going to lose your life someday. or you can value what's going to happen in eternity and live for the Lord. And you know what? When you die, you're going to gain that. Illustration, Jim Elliot, famous missionary, died for the cause of Christ. But years before he died, he made this statement: he is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. It is not a foolish thing to live for eternity, which you can never lose, instead of living for this world, which is going to pass away. Now, what does it mean to pick up your cross and follow Jesus? Number 3, it means choosing to serve instead of be served. Now, the story goes on. Jesus and his disciples start to walk south to the city of Capernaum. And he says it again. He says it to them. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed in the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand what he meant, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So they came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" And they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. I don't know about you guys. I just think this is fascinating. Jesus has just said, I'm going to die and rise again. And what are the disciples doing? I'm the best. I'm the best. No, I'm the best. No, my mother's better than your mother. I mean, they're doing this kind of dialogue. And Jesus looks at them and says, what were you arguing about? And you can just see him go, who's the greatest? You know? And Jesus now, and he's really going to define for us what it means to take up your cross and follow him. Jesus says this. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. He says, this is what it means. Jesus, when he died on the cross, what was he doing? He climbed on that cross to meet our desperate need for salvation. He was serving us. Each one of us. And he says, if you want to follow me, you pick up your cross. And just like I died to serve mankind, you give up your life to serve the very people that I died for. That's what it means to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. A friend of mine, Glenn Gunderson, he pastors Purpose Church in Pomona, told me a story about these 2 kids he knows of. I think they were like 5 years old and 3 years old, and their mom brought in the first pancake. You know, she was making pancakes one at a time, and the kids were like, I want it, it's mine, it's mine. And she looked at him and said, if Jesus were here, he would give the pancake to his brother, and he would wait patiently for the second pancake. And the older brother's name, he looked and he said, okay, he looked at his little brother and said, Ryan, you can be Jesus today. I love that. You know, it's wonderful. You take up your cross and follow Jesus. Here, I'll let you be Jesus today, man. You can do that today. This is a hard thing, man. It's a tough thing. Ray Lessing puts it like this. He says, in God's kingdom, you must stoop to rise, go down to be elevated, empty yourself to be full, and become a servant to be truly great. So I want to just kind of take this home. How do we do that? And I just kind of thought through various examples in Scripture of how you can take up your cross and follow Jesus. And the first one is marriage. It's marriage. You guys see it on the next page? And when I say marriage, I don't mean this. I don't mean you walk around saying, you know what, my wife is my cross to bear. That is not what I'm talking about here, okay? What am I talking about? Well, look at it. Look at it. Ephesians 5:22. Look what it says. It says, wives, submit to your husbands as the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Then it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I heard of a sermon, it was entitled, Marriage, a Sneaky Way to be Crucified. Yeah. And really, when you get married, what you're doing is you are crucifying yourself for that spouse. Wives, submit to your husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. What this means is when God calls us to marriage, he calls us like Jesus laid down his life for us. He calls us to lay down our lives for each other. Now, I'll give a quick example of this in my marriage. There was a time in my marriage I started to think myself, man, I'm always the one doing the work in marriage. I don't know, I went through this kind of pity party, you know. I'm always doing it Karen's way. And I'm always serving Karen. And I feel like I give more in this marriage than she's giving right now. It was in Sacramento. And not really. And I thought, I'm going to help Karen realize this. Do you guys ever do this? And I thought, I'm going to ask her a question that'll help her see how much I give in this marriage. So I thought, I'm going to quantify it. I think I'm giving 80% in this marriage, and she's giving 20% in this marriage. I quantified it. And so I went to her, and I said, hey, Karen, how much do you think you're giving in this marriage, and how much do you think I'm giving in this marriage? Because in my mind, I had that figure. I'm giving 80%. And she looked at me and she said, I think I'm giving about 80% and you're giving about 20%. She totally reversed it. And right then, I came up with something I always tell couples when they're getting married. I call it the 80-80 principle, man. If you think you're giving 80%, your spouse probably thinks they're giving 80%. And the reality is it's probably more like 50-50, okay? So a good marriage, man, a good marriage is a marriage of two people who are both willing to say, I got into this marriage to lay my life down for you. I want to, like Christ, give my life for you. And I'm not keeping score on this. I know I was, okay, but I'm not going to keep score on this. I'm going to lay my life down for you. Now, here's another example. Here's an example of a place that you can take up your cross and follow Jesus. Parenting. Parenting. It's getting quiet in here. Okay. Psalm 103, verse 13. As the Father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion. Isn't it interesting? It uses fathers as an example for God's compassion. And then Paul says, but we were gentle among you like a mother caring for little kids. Paul says, we're trying to treat you like a mom would treat her kids. It's an example to the apostles. Here's the point. Man, parenting is sacrificing your life for somebody. Would you guys agree with that? Now, I can't believe I'm even doing this, but I'm going to quote that theologian Gwen Stefani in church. And here it is. I thought this was a super interesting quote. She said, being a singer is all about me, about ego. But being a mom is all about being selfless. Two different worlds. You know, when I read that quote, I said to myself, listen to this, I have no doubt she's right. So, good. I'm glad you got that. But I mean, that really is parenting. Now, a lot of times we think of that when they're little, like I got to get up in the middle of the night and feed them. But I think a few years ago of a mom that came to me and she said, man, my son wanted to go camping with his girlfriend. And I said no. And now I'm the enemy. And you know, part of sacrificing your life for your kids, part of picking up your life for your kids is sometimes you're not their friend anymore. Sometimes they're going to take your picture out of their wallet. You know what I mean? Sometimes your kids are going to unfollow you on Instagram and Facebook. And that's what it means, man, that you're going to love them the way Christ loved us, and you're going to do what's best for them, whether they like it or not. Parenting, great way to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. Here's another one, volunteering. Look at it, John 13:14. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. My wife, she said this to me one day, and I thought it was good. She said, Dane, we'd all want to wash Jesus' feet. It's each other's feet we have a problem with. I mean, think about that. Is that the truth? I mean, man, if Jesus was up here and said, come wash my feet, whew, we'd swoop up. I want to wash the feet of Jesus. But I've seen your feet, and I'm telling you, that's where it can get stinky sometimes. Am I right about that? But he doesn't say, you come wash my feet. He says, you wash each other's feet. Great example of this. Great example of this. Our junior high schoolers are at camp this weekend up at Thousand Pines. We have a purpose statement in our youth group, and this is it. This is one of them. They have about 5 statements. When a student graduates from high school, we want them to move from being a consumer Christian to an invested Christian. You know what that statement is? We want them to move from this kind of Christian, okay? We want them to move from that to this. And this, I got to tell you what they did yesterday. Our junior high schoolers went to camp, And yesterday, combined, they put in 120 man-hours cleaning up Thousand Pines Camp and serving the people in that camp. And Mitch told me, he texted me and said, the camp sparkles. We should be proud of those junior high schoolers from Centerpoint Church. Yeah. So serving, they laid down their lives. Worship, Hebrews 13:15. Through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of lips that confess his name. You know, sometimes I think about this. We had a woman in our church who's now gone to be with the Lord, and her name was Carol, and she lived in Riverside. And one Sunday, she came up to me, and I said, oh, it's so good to see you in church, because she'd struggled with cancer for about 4 years. And she said to me, I said, it's so good to see you in church. And she said, I'm so glad to be here today to praise the Lord. She said, I had to stop my car and throw up one time on my way here, and I'm totally nauseous, but I'm here to worship Jesus. And she worshiped Jesus with all her heart. And folks, I think that's the point. This verse, it really isn't about a building. It's saying wherever you're at in life, whatever's going on in life, that we give Jesus the praise and the glory and the honor. And that's part of picking up our cross to follow him. And then limiting behavior. I'll just read the verse because we got to move on. It says, be careful, however, that the exercise of your freedom does not become a stumbling block to the weak. Whenever you give up something for a weaker Christian, that's another way to pick up your cross and follow Jesus. Okay, I want to tell you one story, and then we're going to take communion. It's about a church called the Holy Cross Roman Catholic Church in New York City. Here's a picture of their building. A few years ago, thieves broke into this church and they stole something. They stole Jesus. What they actually did is they took the crucifix off the wall and they unbolted a 4-foot plaster Jesus from the crucifix. And they took Jesus and they left the cross behind. The priest of that church was flabbergasted by this. Absolutely flabbergasted. He made this statement to the media. They just decided we're going to leave the cross and take Jesus. We don't know why they just took him. We figure if you want the crucifix, you take the whole crucifix. Folks, I think this is exactly what a lot of people want to do today with Jesus. They want to take Jesus and they want to leave the cross behind. They like the part of Jesus. Oh, he did the miracles. He did the healing. He multiplied the bread. He was so gentle. He was so loving. He got up on the cross and he died for us. They want to take that. But they want to leave the cross behind. The part of Jesus that said, this is what I've done for you. Now I'm calling you to pick up your cross and follow me. To serve a broken world like I served a broken world.